What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? I would like to welcome you all to another edition of Wayne's Perspective, where we operate in discipline, decency, integrity, and respect. And I'm coming through with another video just for you. And this particular video is going to be for my fellow wrestling fans. So now I'm going to enjoy this one. Now outside of the video that I just put up, the second session of the Monday Night War Revisited, I haven't really talked about wrestling as much on my channel because of other notable things that was going on the last couple of months. And after listening to a few shows on YouTube, where else, and hearing all this new era talk, I had to come through with this one, y'all. So I'm gonna take you back and I'm gonna talk about my past, present, and future as a wrestling fan. So um, I talked about this briefly in my introduction, where I talked about my history with hip hop, wanting to become a politician, and also my history with professional wrestling. So I am going to repeat certain things, but also add a couple of content, for content matters. So just stick with me for this one. I can already tell you it's going to be a lot. So hopefully y'all stick with me because I got a lot to talk about, and I think it's going to be enjoyable because I'm going to enjoy making it. So with all that being said, y'all, as I mentioned in my introduction, I've been a fan of pro wrestling since the age of 5. So we talking back in 1989, starting in 1989. Now, my mom and I, we were living with my grandma at this point, and I will always remember that on Saturday mornings, it had to be Saturday mornings, I would be in a room laying on the bed or whatever and watching wrestling, one of the wrestling shows, in this case WWF. And as soon as my grandma hit the room, she would say, boy, turn that TV, or she would just be indignant, as soon as she see wrestling on the TV, she would make me turn, and of course I had to turn. I mean, what else was I gonna do? Put up a fight at 5 years old? So, needless to say, I was like, man, want to watch wrestling, I can't watch it. So also I wouldn't find this out until years later, but my mom, she was also a wrestling fan at this point, mainly of the NWA. And the four names that she would remember right off the top of her head was Ric Flair. She said that she liked Ric Flair because of his hair and the robes that he wore. She liked the Road Warriors because of how mean they were. And she liked Dusty Rhodes because he could talk his ass off. So think about that for a minute now. Now, after a while, my mom, she checked out of wrestling completely. Why? The Dusty finish. Now when my mom said that she checked out of it because it started to get so phony, that's exactly what she was talking about, and she never looked back outside of some clips and things that I would show her in later years. But outside of that, she was never a wrestling fan again after that. And also, those listening, if you don't know what the Dusty finish is, look it up. That's all I can tell you. So going from there, in I think in late 1990, my mom, she finally moved into her first apartment, and of course, I was with her. And it was at this point where I could be free to watch wrestling without nobody telling me to turn the TV, nobody fussing at me or anything. So at this point, I would watch All American Wrestling, Primetime Wrestling, Wrestling Challenge, WWF Superstars. I mean, the whole nine. However, whenever I asked my mom to order me a pay-per-view, she would not do it, y'all. I mean, she would refuse, boy, I ain't ordering that. I could hear her now, and there were times when I would ask her, even when a pay-per-view was like literally on the air, because I specifically remember WrestleMania 7 being on the air. She would not order it. SummerSlam 1991 was on the air. She would not order it. And I was like, man, I wanted to see these shows. Now, also, just to add some in, it was also around this time, in 1991, going into 1992, we had Blockbuster Video back in the day. We had Video World back in the day. So, of course, my mom had a membership to both video stores, and I would rent those tapes. I mean, y'all remember the Coliseum videotapes? Yeah, this taking me back, y'all. So I would say the tapes that I used to rent a lot were SummerSlam 90s, Survivor Series 1990, Royal Rumble 91, Royal Rumble 92, WrestleMania 7. I would rent those a lot. Now, I do remember that when SummerSlam 1992 came to video, oh my God, I couldn't wait to see it because this was another one of those shows where I really wanted to see it, but again, my mom, she did not want to order this pay-per-view. And I remember Scramble Vision. Y'all remember that? Where you could see a scrambled version of the show. You could only hear it, but you couldn't see the actual pictures of what was going on. I mean, that's what we had to do back in the day, y'all. So um, I specifically remember um, the Ultimate Warrior versus Randy Savage match. I remember hearing Vince McMahon and Bobby Heenan on commentary when Ric Flair and Mr. Perfect came out, because they was trying to determine who had sold out, and stuff like that. And I do remember hearing British Bulldog defeat Bret Hart for the Intercontinental title in the main event, and how happy I was, because I really liked British Bulldog at the time. His title reign didn't last long, but that's another story. So, so I was watching, I was actively watching, and I was a big fan at the time. Now, looking back, the one thing that I never got a chance to do was have one of those ice cream bars. I never got a chance to get one, and to this day, I'm not even sure if any other local stores in the area even sold them, but they were real popular at the time. And another thing, I never got a chance to get one of the WWF toy replica belts. I never got a chance to own one, and I wonder what my reaction would be today as a black man that's pushing 40 years old. I wonder what my reaction would be if I actually got to get my hands on a WWF replica belt. And I'm talking about the Wing Eagle belt. So, yeah, man. So, again, I was a big fan at this time. Now, as luck would have it, when 1993 arrived, a blessing came my way. And what was that blessing? So my grandpa, God rest his soul, he had an apartment and he had a hot box. And of course, older fans, y'all remember what a hot box was. Now, I would assume that at this point in present day 2024, those boxes, they do not exist any longer. So I was able to see the pay-per-views at his house for a long stretch, basically from King of the Ring 1993, which was the first pay-per-view I saw live from the WWF, all the way up until, I believe, either King of the Ring 95 or the second installment of In Your House. It was one of those two, but it escapes me at this point. So needless to say, every time a pay-per-view came around, I would anticipate it very much. And I specifically remember one time when I went to his barbershop, because you see, also, he would give me free haircuts because I was his grandson, the oldest grandson. So I remember going into WrestleMania 10, and myself, him, and other people in the barbershop, we was talking about the upcoming card. Now, I remember specifically saying that when it came to the Randy Savage versus Crush match, that was going to be a street fight. And as it turns out, it became a no-holds-barred match or something like that, which was tame compared to what we were seeing later years, but that's another story. So, again, I was a big fan. I would get the WWF magazine. I mean, I enjoyed it, and even in 1995, which has long been considered one of the company's worst years. Now, to me, it wasn't. I think one of the worst years in company history was 1993, but I still have fond memories of this period. I still have fond memories of 1995 because at that time I was 11. So I was still actively watching and following everything. Now, speaking of following everything, that brings me to WCW. Now, prior to 1995, I did watch WCW off and on. I would watch WCW Saturday night on TBS at 6:05. Y'all know. And it was good. I wasn't a big fan of it like I was with the WWF. And that was even when Hogan and Savage and all of the other WWF alumni, they came along. So I didn't really start watching fully until Nitro came. So that was my history with WCW. Now, interestingly enough, when I was with one of my aunts back in 1992, we went to somebody's house and we watched the Halloween Havoc 1992 pay-per-view. And the only thing that I remember from that show off the top of my head was that spin the wheel, make the deal match between Sting and Jake the Snake Roberts, which was pretty much that was it for Jake Roberts after that match. But again, that's another story. So that's my history with WCW. I'm going to come back to them when I get into the Monday Night War, which I'm going to touch on next. But before I get to the Monday Night War, let me briefly talk about ECW. Now, I didn't become aware of ECW fully until like what? 1999. And even then, I don't think ECW was airing in my area, even in syndication. Or if it was, I wasn't checking on it because in 1999, my focus was on the WWF and a little bit on WCW. So I didn't really start watching ECW until they came to TNN. I watched a couple of episodes, but I didn't stick around. And the only ECW pay-per-view that I saw when it aired was Hardcore Heaven 2000, you know. And oh yeah, we're gonna talk about the year 2000, trust me. So that was the only pay-per-view that I saw. Now, also in an interesting twist, now I do have all of those ECW pay-per-views from 96, 97-ish, all the way up until their last one in 2001. But I haven't even watched them yet because I haven't had the time to get to them yet. Eventually I will, but I do have them in my collection. So that was my brief history with ECW. They were popular, but as far as I'm concerned, it was all about the Monday Night War, which that's a segue here. Now, if you're following my channel, I've already posted 2 videos already talking about, the Monday Night War. I talked about the Nitro debut in 1995, September 4th to be exact. And I also put up a video talking about the September 11th editions of both shows as well. So if you haven't checked those out, be sure to check those out. I am going to have up the episode talking about both shows from September 18th, 95 pretty soon. So stay tuned for that. Now, as I've talked about before, this Monday Night War era, this was a great time to be a wrestling fan, switching back and forth from TNT to USA and vice versa. It was great, Now, my TV was on USA most of the time because, again, I was a WWF boy, So, it was real good. Now, you want to talk about must-see TV? That was it. The Monday Night War, that was it. And, it just, man, it was great. It was a great time to be a wrestling fan, and as 96 arrived, the NWO was on top of the wrestling world. And then, 97, the WWF was starting to get back to it in terms of the early days of the Attitude Era. And I'm going to talk about that. Then 1998 came, the rise of Stone Cold Steve Austin, and then when you go further, The Rock, DX, and stuff like that. Undertaker, Kane, Mankind, you name it. It was so great, And would it still be going on today if things were different? Who knows? Who knows what things would be? But like I said, it was such an exciting time to be a wrestling fan. You just couldn't wait until both shows started. And then later years, Nitro would start at 8, and then Raw would start at 9, and then you would be flipping back and forth. And like I said, my channel was always on USA. Now, I will say the one time I probably switched back to Nitro more was probably July 6, 1998. That was the night that Goldberg beat Hogan for the WCW title. And still, even to this day, people criticize Eric Bischoff for giving that match away for free on Nitro when it easily could have been a big pay-per-view between the first ever Hogan Goldberg match, And I think to this day, I think he still defends that decision, but a lot of people clown him for it because of the money that they could have made on pay-per-view and at the live gate, But that's another story. But like I said, regarding the Monday Night War, it was exciting. And as far as my actual channel, that's going to be a ambitious undertaking to see if I'm going to even be able to do that entire war. We're talking about a war that lasted from September 4th, 1995, all the way up until March 26, 2001. So will I be able to do it? We shall see, but it's going to be an interesting journey. I'll tell you one thing, man. And speaking of interesting journeys, that take me to the Attitude Era. Now, as Triple H once said, it was the most exciting time in our business. And trust me, I'm going to have a lot to say about that guy, but I'm going to save that towards the end. But the Attitude Era, one thing that made it great, not only the TV, we're talking about Raw and then SmackDown, the pay-per-view, Sunday Night Heat, you name it. One thing that made that era great was because you didn't have anybody actually coming out and saying, um, this is the Attitude Era. Now, let me explain. Now, there were mentions of that on WWF TV. You did have the ads, this isn't real. Try lacing my boots. I remember the ad. Y'all remember those, but it wasn't this big push. It wasn't like, you know, this is going to be the Attitude Era. It happened organically. And when you had Vince McMahon, who gave that speech on TV in late 97, basically telling the viewer, I know you're tired of having your intelligence insulted, and, people want reality, shades of gray and stuff like that. And that, for better or worse, it became reflected in the TV product. And I mean, they was competing with WCW, so they had to make some changes because at the rate that they were going, they could not continue to, keep producing that same show that they were doing. So it was only right that they step up the television product. It was only right that things got a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more risque, if you will. Shades of gray characters. Basically people who were themselves turned up to 11. In the case with Stone Cold Steve Austin. And I'm going to talk about him in a second too. But they had to make some changes. And when Nitro becoming a 2-hour show, Raw could not continue to stay at 1 hour. So you had Raw go to 2 hours, and then at one point you had Nitro go to 3 hours. Now, currently, Raw is a 3-hour show, but way back then, at this point, even with the roster that they had, they did not need to have a 3-hour show. Raw did not need to be 3 hours back in 97 or 98 or 99. Granted, people would have still been watching, but I think if Raw was also 3 hours, that would have affected the quality of that show. And thankfully, nobody even had the thought of Raw being a 3-hour show at that point during the war, But like I said, the Attitude Era, I mean, it produced a lot of moments, specifically on Raw. And like I said, name the names, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, The Undertaker, Mankind, DX, Ken Shamrock, names like that. Those are the names that just come off the top of my head, and even to a lesser extent, Ken Shamrock, Jeff Jarrett, who else? Too Much, which will later be known as Too Cool, Al Snow, things like that. Just a few names off the top of my head, but it was a great time. And like I said, organically, naturally, it became the Attitude Era. It wasn't this big push or this big press release like, we're going to call this the Attitude Era. It just happened. And that's why, that's one of the reasons why it's so fondly remembered to this day, not just because of the television product, but because of how that era, it was an organic feeling. You felt it at the time, at least I know I did, and it was such a great time to be a wrestling fan, which segues to Stone Cold Steve Austin in 1998. Now, as you know, if you checked out my introduction, Stone Cold Steve Austin is my number 2 favorite wrestler of all time, and 1998 is my favorite year in wrestling history. And that year, that was his year, I mean, the ratings showed it, the box office showed it, the television product showed it, fan sentiment showed it. I mean, Austin was that guy. He was my guy at that time, and I still have fond memories of that. And speaking of fond memories, one of my favorite mark-out moments as a fan was when he won the WWF title for the first time at WrestleMania 14, March 29th, 1998. I won't forget it. I'll never forget that, Now, also, let me back up a little bit. Now, I talked about my mom a little bit, and when she, refused to order pay-per-views for me. Now, as it turned out, she finally ordered one in 1997, and that was the Ground Zero in Your House pay-per-view. Finally, after all these years, she finally ordered one for me, y'all. I was happy, but I was like, man, Mom, you could have ordered me SummerSlam 91. You could have ordered the 1992 Royal Rumble. You could have ordered WrestleMania 8. You could have ordered SummerSlam 92, Mom. You could have, but I appreciate it. And I still remember the cable bill too that had to purchase. it was $34.97. You know, and the interesting thing about that is that I didn't watch the whole show at home. I watched half of the show at home, and I watched the second half of it at a friend's house. So after all that fussing I was doing, I didn't watch the whole damn show at home. Can you believe that? You know, so but getting back to 1998, so what happened was my mom, she was working with a good friend at the time who also liked wrestling. So it was at this point when I would go to her house and her son and her husband at the time. But then again, I don't think they was married. But I digress. But her son and the man that was staying there, they were wrestling fans too. So I would go there each Sunday that a pay-per-view came on, and again, this was WWF, you know, and I would watch the pay-per-views. And like I said, I was real excited for WrestleMania 14 at the time. Enjoyed it, top to bottom. Still one of my favorite WrestleManias of all time. And like I said, one of my mark-out moments was when Stone Cold won that championship, man. You know, Stone Cold's 8-year journey has been culminated with WWF Gold. I always remember that Jim Ross call, you know. And then from there, from WrestleMania 14 all the way up until King of the Ring 99, I went to my mom's friend's house to watch all of those shows. And I remember, you know, just being so excited each time out, especially when the King of the Ring 98 came. And y'all remember that infamous Mankind Undertaker match, you know, Hell in a Cell, you know, I know y'all remember it, you know, and then just remember how excited I was for next night's Raw, which was a great show. Austin won the WWF title back after losing to Kane in a first blood match the previous night. You know, SummerSlam 98 was awesome. I remember being excited for Survivor Series. I was excited for the 1999 Royal Rumble. I was excited for WrestleMania 15. I was excited for King of the Ring 99. I mean, again, it was just a great time to be a wrestling fan. A great time, you know. And like I said, 1998 is my favorite year in wrestling history. My second favorite year is 1989, followed by, I want to say, 2000, then 1999, and I'm not sure what makes number 5, but that's another story for another day, y'all. So, but again, Steve Austin, man, I still thank that guy for the memories from 1998. And it was also around this time when he was doing something crazy on TV. Now, this was in 98 and 99. I would often go into the living room while my mom and her then boyfriend, they would be watching TV. I would say, Mom, check this out, check this out. And I would switch to USA, and she would jokingly say, you know, boy, turn the TV back, because she would probably be watching football or something. Then, boy, turn the TV back. But I was like, no, Mom, let's finish this segment, you know. And she would watch it, and she would basically have this look on her face, like as Stone Cold would be talking and how tough he was. My mom would be like, you know, she would have his face like, you know, like who he think he is, you know. And I remember turning to the TV when he let me see, what's some memories. When he came up with the cement truck and had and poured cement into Vince McMahon's Corvette. When he came in there with the Zamboni and bumped into the ring and jumped off the Zamboni and clothesline Vince. I remember that. And of course, I remember turning the TV when she was in there to see them with the beer truck going into WrestleMania 15. I remember that one as well. She could not stop laughing at that, you know. So yeah, so quite the memories right there. But again, shout out to Stone Cold Steve Austin, man. That guy, man, so many memories. And like I said, he was just so popular. And speaking of popular, that takes me to my next point. So I was looking at a video today, and in the comment section, somebody mentioned that wrestling isn't culturally relevant. And that's a true statement, because when you think back to the Monday Night War era, wrestling was a cultural thing, you know, not just WWF, but WCW as well. You know, Steve Austin was, you know, mainstream. You know, DX was mainstream. The NWO was mainstream. I mean, it was everywhere. You know, the merchandise, the catchphrases. I mean, in late 1998, going into 1999, I was a freshman in high school. So us as wrestling fans, we would always get to school the next day talking about, you seen what happened on Nitro, you seen what happened on Raw. I mean, it was so exciting. Now, I don't know if kids are doing that today with just Raw. I would be surprised if they are. But back then, it was a thing, man. I mean, that would be one of the first things we would be talking about. What happened on wrestling? What happened on Nitro? What happened on Raw? Did you see the pay-per-view the previous night? Did you see this? Did you see that? It was a level of excitement that we're not going to get again, and it was culturally relevant because at this point, it wouldn't be out of ordinary to see Steve Austin on the Regis and Kathy Lee show. It wouldn't be out of ordinary to see Goldberg and other wrestlers on the cover of TV Guide. It wouldn't be unusual. That was expected at the time, and it was just a big cultural thing. Now, I also say this too now. The January 4th, 1999 edition of Raw and Nitro combined to do a 10.0 rating. That means millions of wrestling fans were watching both shows at a certain point during that night. Now, that also was the night that two things happened. Longtime fans remember that was the night when Tony Schiavone, on the orders of Eric Bischoff, gave away the results of Raw that night, which was taped. Now, Raw at this point was live more than they were just a few short years prior. But when Tony Schiavone made that announcement and said that, Cactus Jack, Mick Foley, who once wrestled here as Cactus Jack, is going to win their world title. That'll put butts in seats. Oh boy. And I think what they said, 585,000 viewers changed the channel immediately when he said that, because it was kind of, I think looking back at it, Raw probably still would have won that night, but Nitro would have been very close to winning that night for the first time since October 26, 1998. Y'all know I know my stuff now. So needless to say, that verbal miscue cost them dearly. And like I said, a 10.0 combined rating, we're never going to see nothing like that again. Even if somehow, some way AEW decides that they wanted to go head to head with WWE, I mean, you're just never going to see that level of excitement, that level of engagement, that type of viewership. You're just not going to see that again, And also what happened that night, as Tony Schiavone mentioned, Mankind won the WWF title for the first time. He beat The Rock in a pretty good match. That crowd, oh my God, man. When that glass broke and Austin came out, I mean, that crowd, sheesh. I mean, that's one of my favorite pops. And I mean, I don't think you'll ever hear no loud pops like that again. I mean, when that glass broke, I mean, I would love to bring it up on the screen right now, but I'm going to keep going with my post. That pop when that glass broke, I mean, sheesh. And Michael Cole, Stone Cold is here. Stone Cold is here. I mean, and, he came in and, hit Rock with the chair, pull Mankind on top, and the pop that Mankind got when he won that title. I mean, those are just moments you can't forget, on my Nas voice, moments you can't relive, Now, I can relive it in a sense when I throw the clip in. I mean, sheesh, man, that pop, man. Oh my goodness. Okay. But like I said, it was culturally relevant at the time, and quite frankly, it'll never be that culturally relevant again, So as things went on, as 1999 arrived, if I can back up a little bit, I focused more on the WWF. WCW was starting to slip. I mean, it was not a good product. And in fact, I think I stopped watching WCW for a bit in, I want to say April of 1999. And I didn't watch another Nitro until November, which is around the time when Vince Russo came aboard. I watched a couple of shows, but then again, I checked out. I didn't check back in with WCW until Bischoff and Russo came back for the April 10th, 2000 episode of Nitro, which was decent, but further reviews would show it was not that good of a show. Now, in April and May and June, all the way up to the night after Bash at the Beach 2000, I was watching WCW on a regular because, it was something about the product that was a little exciting, and that's mainly because even though, Russo was on board. I was a fan of his, because at that point I already knew the role that he played when him and Ed Ferrara was with the WWF. So I was watching because it was, I don't want to say it was an excellent product, but I was watching because there was a level of curiosity at the time just to see what they're going to do. But for the most part, I was WWF through and through. So when Raw came on, I never turned the TV back unless Raw was on a commercial, and that was going into 2000. And, 1999 was a great year for the WWF. 2000 was even better, which most people will probably say from a storyline standpoint, a storytelling standpoint, the year 2000 was one of their best years. And I agree. I was actively watching. I was a sophomore in high school at this point. And I mean, it was great. Raw was off the hook. SmackDown was off the hook. Sunday Night Heat was off the hook. The pay-per-views were great. I mean, Royal Rumble was awesome. No Way Out, awesome. WrestleMania, a disappointment. Backlash, awesome. Judgment Day, awesome. King of the Ring, a major disappointment. Fully Loaded, awesome. SummerSlam, awesome. Unforgiven, so. No Mercy, pretty good. Survivor Series was okay. Armageddon was okay, but 2000, a great year. Triple H, the man, and I'm going to get to him later. The Rock on top. Steve Austin will come back later, but The Rock and Triple H, they carried things along with other talents. Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit, Kurt Angle, The Big Show. And on the tag team side, you had the Hardy Boys, Edge and Christian, the Dudley Boys, even Too Cool. I mean, man, such a good time to be a fan. And as with some things, good things come to an end. So that brings me to March 26, 2001. That was it. That was the last of the Monday Night Wars, and I remember being at school that day. Now, at this point, I was a junior in high school, and I would check the websites every day. And when I went to WWF.com, the homepage said Vince McMahon to speak on WCW acquisition. I was like, what? Because even though I was following online and I was, privy to the backstage stuff, when I saw that headline and when I saw that headline, I was like, man, Vince McMahon speaks on the acquisition of WCW. You mean he bought WCW? And that was confirmed that night. I remember one of my homeboys, he had spent the night with me that night, and we had watched Nitro that night, and we saw Vince McMahon come up on the screen, and we both looked at each other like, what? And that was that whole thing about, the fate of WCW lies in these hands. And that's when they had the simulcast and all that stuff. And, Vince McMahon was going to shelve WCW, when you're and I'm paraphrasing, when you're in competition with, when you're competing, you have to squeeze the life out of your competition, just like I did the WCW. I remember, he did the whole who should I keep, who should I fire, and all that stuff. And then it ended with Shane McMahon, quote unquote, buying WCW, and also ECW was going out of business. So they were also building the WrestleMania 17. And I'm going to come back to that. Trust me, I'm going to come back to that. But I mean, all this stuff was happening at the same time. And, basically it was coming to an end, March 26, 2001. The last of the head-to-head battle between Raw and Nitro. The WWF had won, and I know I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because I'm talking about revisiting the war in some of my other posts, but y'all bearing with me here, but I'm gonna continue on. So, man, WrestleMania 17, y'all. The greatest WrestleMania of all time, my favorite WrestleMania of all time. As far as I'm concerned, still the greatest WrestleMania of all time. No pay-per-view will ever top it. None. None have some come close. No, not in my opinion. No. Not WrestleMania 19, not WrestleMania 20. No. That right there was the unofficial end of the Monday Night War era. And as far as I'm concerned, the Attitude Era too. But I'm gonna come back to that. But like I said, the build up to that show was probably not the best, to let most people say it, but that show, when it went on air, excellent. Even the matches that would be considered filler were good. But as far as I'm concerned, what made that show, not just because it was at the Houston Astrodome, not just because of the crowd. I mean, they were in it the whole night from start to finish, in the pageantry of WrestleMania. But um, Chris Benoit and Kurt Angle had an excellent match in which they would have better matches down the road. But as far as I'm concerned, that was the start of that. Even the Vince McMahon versus Shane McMahon street fight was pretty good, and of course, who can forget when Linda McMahon got up out her wheelchair and that pop, another big pop. She got up out her chair, and Vince McMahon, when he turned around holding that trash can, he had this oh shit look on his face, and he, like he normally did around this point, took one for the team with that low blow she gave him. I mean, oh man. But anyway, that was a decent match. And then TLC 2 with Edge and Christian and the Dudley Boys and the Hardys, great stuff. Now, to this day, I couldn't tell you whether that match was better or the inaugural TLC match at SummerSlam 2000 was the best. Now, I'm going to have to watch both of those back to back. That was an excellent match. Oh, yeah. I do give that McMahon match 4 stars. I give the Kurt Angle versus Chris Benoit match 4 stars and a half. TLC 2 is 5 stars. Then you had the Undertaker versus Triple H match. That was 4 stars. And as far as I'm concerned, that's probably their most underrated match because apparently, for whatever reason, people in the company didn't like to talk about that match. I don't know why. But then again, I think I know why. The American Badass gave me, but I digress. And then, of course, that main event, which is one of my top 10 favorite matches of all time, Steve Austin versus The Rock. The 2 biggest stars of the Attitude Era going at it at WrestleMania in the main event, the pinnacle of WrestleMania. The 2 biggest stars going at it, and great match. The finish was a little but I still give it 5 stars. And what most people probably still don't connect to this day is that when Vince McMahon and Steve Austin shook hands at the end of that show, that was the end of the Attitude Era. It wasn't mentioned as such at the time, and it wasn't viewed as such, but that was the end of the Attitude Era right there, because since then, things have never been the same, creatively or otherwise. Some of the people who watched WCW for years, they never came back. So that was it. Now, I'll say this. I did continue to watch after the fact. Now, most longtime fans will remember 2001 being all about the invasion, the Alliance versus the WWF. I remember it. I remember it well. I was actively watching. Now the storylines were all over the place, but we did get some great matches, out of the whole ordeal. And of course, I done read a lot of articles, including, the Death of WCW book, how, the WWF, they botched the invasion and all that stuff. I do agree, because had they played it right, it would have been awesome, but I don't want to waste too much time on that, because I done read a lot of articles about what the invasion could have been, it should have been, and hell, if you go on Google right now or even YouTube, you can find some articles talking about it, So it was, I mean, we got some great matches, and all of that stuff. But like I said, things were never the same. And as far as 2001 went, after WrestleMania 17, it was all about the invasion, And once they ended it, then they had to go into another direction. And speaking of another direction, that brings me to the brand extinction. Now, okay. I remember 2002 at this point. This was a couple of weeks after WrestleMania 18, which I did not see when it aired. Now, I remember being intrigued about what the brand extinction was going to be, but once they did it, I did not like it. Still to this day, I don't like it. Brand split, roster split, brand extinction, I don't like it. And I think somebody said it was the wrong execution of the right idea. Now, the thing is that at this point in March 2002, their roster was huge. We're talking about the normal WWF roster, and plus they brought over some holdovers from WCW and ECW, so they had to do something. Now, I argued then and I argue now that the course of action to take was not to split the rosters. You could have had a high creative meeting and you just had to do something, but splitting the roster was not my idea. So then we get into this whole Raw versus SmackDown nonsense. I mean, I never bought into that because I mean it's still under the same umbrella. And they could miss me with that nonsense about creating our own competition and all this other stuff. I never liked it. I was not a quote unquote Raw guy or SmackDown guy, and then I was just never into it. And trust me, I'm gonna come back to the brand extinction again. Mark my words. But I just did not like it. Now, some of the storylines during this period were suspect. Katie Vick, I'm looking at you. You know, but we did get some great matches out of the whole ordeal. And y'all remember the SmackDown 6 where in the latter part of 2002, going into the early part of 2003, it was like every week you would get a great match on SmackDown, courtesy of the SmackDown 6. Chris Benoit, Kurt Angle, Rey Mysterio, Edge, Eddie Guerrero, and Chavo Guerrero. Great stuff. I got those matches. I still look at them. But the one thing that gets on my nerves now, just like it did then, was Michael Cole and Taz. They're constant hyping a SmackDown. Like, you can only see this on SmackDown. You can only see the cruiserweights on SmackDown and SmackDown this, SmackDown that. I'm like, guys, we get it. We get it already. Like, stop it. If y'all can see me right now, I'm trying to pull hair out of my head, but I don't got hair on my head because I'm bald. But I digress. But they got on my last nerve with that. Oh, but anyway, moving on from that. So, like I said, it may have been the wrong execution of the right idea, but like I said, I never liked the brand extinction. Never, then or now. So now, of course, with WCW going out of business and ECW going out of business, you had some other startup companies that came into play. ROH in its initial incarnation, I never watched a single episode of ROH, and then again, I don't even think it was available in my area. If it was, I might have checked it out, but I still was a WWF guy, or in this case, it changed over to WWE. And if you want to know the story behind that, y'all can look that up. TNA. I watched a few episodes of TNA Impact in 2006, 2007, but it was never my cup of tea, even with the talent that they had. It was never my cup of tea. And the thing that company is still in business right now is mind-boggling, but I digress. So then we skip over that. Then we get to the ruthless aggression era. Now, see, I remember Vince McMahon being on TV christening the era, the ruthless aggression era. Now, it didn't quite take off like the Attitude Era did. That's probably because, you're outright christening it as that instead of letting it happen organically. That's why it didn't take off. Now, excuse me, years later, some people probably look back fondly on it because of, a couple of documentaries that's been made about it or whatever. But needless to say, it didn't take off the way they wanted to. But again, during this period, from 2002 to 2003, 2004, 2005, and onward, we got some great matches out of the whole ordeal. Let me see. Let me try to name some off the top of my head. So when I think about 2002, let me see. Shawn Michaels versus Triple H at SummerSlam. Eddie Guerrero and Edge had a great, I think it was a no disqualification match on SmackDown. And if I have my dates right, I think that was September 26, 2002. The match of the year in 2002, No Mercy. Eddie Guerrero, no, not Eddie Guerrero. Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit against Edge and Rey Mysterio. Great match. Let's see. Probably one of the more underrated matches from that year, The Rock versus Chris Jericho from the Royal Rumble. Now, they had two awesome matches in the latter part of 2001. Their first one was at No Mercy 2001. Chris Jericho won the WCW title. And then about a couple of weeks later, they had a match on the November 5th edition of Raw, which was pretty good too. So that's okay. So overall, okay. So getting back to 2002, so that was 4 matches. So I'm trying to think of a fifth off the top of my head. Hmm. Wow. Probably the Fatal Four-Way match in June. I mean, not June, in December 2002. I can't recall the date right now. Probably December 5th, 2002. There was a four-way match between Eddie Guerrero, Edge, Chris Benoit, and Kurt Angle. Great stuff. And then we get to 2003. What do I remember from 2003? Okay, the match of the year, Kurt Angle versus Chris Benoit, the Royal Rumble. Oh, and speaking of Kurt Angle versus Chris Benoit, they had an excellent underrated match in Unforgiven 2002. That was a great match. Great match. And I'm going to come back to Chris Benoit as well. So getting back to 2003, like I said, the Kurt Angle versus Chris Benoit match from the Royal Rumble, then that WrestleMania, Shawn Michaels against Chris Jericho. And I'm not, I bypassed the star ratings. I just wanted to mention the matches that I could think of off the top of my head. Kurt Angle versus Brock Lesnar was good, but they had a excellent Iron Man match on SmackDown, the first time ever on TV. That was the September 18th, 2003 edition of SmackDown. What other matches? Let's see. 2003. What, Chris Benoit versus Eddie Guerrero at Vengeance 2003 to crown a new U.S. champion. Also, Kurt Angle, Brock Lesnar, and The Big Show had a great triple threat match on the same show. Yeah, so that's what I remember from 2003. Then 2004, I could think of a couple of matches, but the first one that comes to mind, well, the first two that comes to mind is that Royal Rumble match that Chris Benoit won, as well as the triple threat match between Benoit, Shawn Michaels, and Triple H at WrestleMania 20. Then 2005, Kurt Angle versus Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 21. They also had a couple of let me go to 2005, going to 2006. Now, there was some good matches in 2005, but the ones that come to mind immediately for me in 2005, in addition to that first Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania 21, is the Kurt Angle Shawn Michaels series. They had a great match at WrestleMania 21. Kurt Angle won that. They had an awesome rematch at Vengeance 2005. Shawn Michaels won that one. Then on Raw Homecoming, I think that was October 3rd, 2005, when they came back to USA for the first time since August 2000, I think, or September 2000. That match went to a draw because it was a 30-minute Iron Man match. It went to a draw. There was no winner. Then they had another match on one of them episodes in January 2006 on Raw. Can't recall the date. That was a great match too. Shawn Michaels won that. And also on that same show, Ric Flair and Edge had an awesome TLC match for the WWE title. Man, so I remember that. And then just to go back to 2005 for a moment, what else do I remember from that year? I know I wanted to just talk about Kurt Angle and Shawn Michaels. Oh, yeah. Batista and Triple H had an awesome Hell in a Cell match at Vengeance 2005. And also in that same show, there was a John Cena, Chris Jericho Christian match that was also awesome. So, man, I could go on and on talking about these years, but, that's what I remember. So then, 2006 was not that good of a year, even though it was a couple of great matches that year. Edge versus Mick Foley at WrestleMania 22. Even John Cena versus Triple H for the WWF title was pretty good. They also had an underrated triple threat match at Backlash 2006 with John Cena, Edge, and John Cena, Edge. And who was the third man? John Cena. John Cena, Edge, and Triple H. Yeah, that was a pretty good match. Hold on. Was that John Cena, Edge, and Triple H? Let me check something right quick, y'all. Give me 1 second. I want to make sure I got that right. Because also on that Backlash 2006 show, it was a Shelton Benjamin versus RVD match, which was pretty good. So let me see. I'm looking at my collection right now. Let's see. Yep. John Cena versus Edge versus Triple H Backlash 2006. And also, since I'm looking at 2006, John Cena and Edge had a great TLC match at Unforgiven that year. Yep. So then we skip over to 2007, and I'm sure everybody remember that's when the Chris Benoit situation happened. And that was on my birthday. And I remember when my sister, she called me and told me about that. And I was like, hold up. And then I went to the WWE.com homepage, and there it was. Chris Benoit, deceased, along with some other stuff. Now, we would find out later what actually happened, but that was a big deal at the time, and it wasn't the end of the wrestling business as most people thought. But that was major news at the time. Now, for a while, I didn't watch anything that had Chris Benoit in it. But after a while, I was like, okay, I can watch some matches with him. Now, it's cringeworthy in some aspects, especially when he take chair shots to the head or do that flying headbutt off the top rope. Yeah, that's cringe to watch today, considering what happened. Now, I would say this: when hindsight being 2020, when he came back in 2002 after that neck surgery, because I think he said he had some something was starting to dip into his spinal column or something like that, and he had surgery. He was out for a few months. He should have stopped doing that diving headbutt off the top rope. He should have let that go permanently. And who's to say if that man would still be here today had he let that go? But why was he still doing that after that surgery he had on his neck? I don't know. Only he knew that at the time. But yeah, after a while, I could watch his matches, but it took some time. Now, the one match of his that I don't have in my collection that I would never watch again, and that's the triple threat rematch from WrestleMania 20, the match against with him, Triple H, and Shawn Michaels. Now, not only was this in Canada, but his wife Nancy and the son Daniel, I think his name Daniel or Danny, they were at ringside, and at times they were panning the camera to them. I can never watch that match again. No way, no how. So moving on from there, going through the rest of 2007 and 2008, I was watching, but I don't really have too much to say about either of those years. So then we get to 2009 and 2010 respectively. So, okay, WrestleMania 25, this was probably one of the first pay-per-views in a long time that I fell asleep on, midway. But man, when the Shawn Michaels Undertaker match came on, which is also in my top 10, I sat up and took notice. Man, that was an awesome match. As a matter of fact, I might watch that match when I finish this video. I might. But man, that was such a great match. Man, you know, I barely remember what took place on the rest of the show, but that was a great match. And then they would have a rematch at WrestleMania 26 the next year, which was basically, Shawn Michaels' career on the line. Now, he lost. It was still a great match. And I think that probably was the last WrestleMania that I was really excited for because of the card itself. But I was looking forward to that Shawn Michaels Undertaker match. And like I said, that was a great, 25 was a great match, classic. The follow-up was good too. It was pretty good, but not as great. And the one reason why I haven't went back and watched the rematch to this day is because of Matt Striker's commentary. Now, I remember a lot of people at the time talking about, Matt Striker, he's a good commentator because he knows his wrestling. Okay, you may be knowledgeable about the sport, but that don't make you a good commentator. And he just drove me crazy doing that match. Every time it was a big spot, here he come. Oh, like, dude, shut up. Like, stop. So, but again, that, as far as I'm concerned, that period right there, HBK versus Taker, and also that 2010 Royal Rumble match, that was great too. Probably well, no, I don't want to say one of the last great ones, but in this era, that was great. It was better than the 2009 version and the 2008 version. Dare I say the 2007 version? So yeah, it was, it was pretty good. So, um, let's see. So other memorable times for me as a fan, in this particular era. So let me get to WrestleMania 30. Okay. Um, them ending the Undertaker's undefeated streak at WrestleMania. I said it then and I said it now. They shouldn't have done it. And I'll explain. Now, I remember being in my computer because this was what one of the first was this one of the first shows on the WWE network? Y'all remember that? I think this was one of the first shows because they were slowly but surely pulling away from traditional pay-per-view. And this was like a precursor to what we're seeing now with the streaming and all of that stuff. But I remember sitting at my computer because I watched it online. And when Brock Lesnar beat Taker, that 3 count, I mean, my jaws would drop too now, just like that guy in the audience. Y'all remember the clip? I was like, man, you know. And as it turns out, it was Vince McMahon's decision. Now, again, and I'm going to talk about Vince towards the end as well. But I didn't think it was a good idea because what they would eventually do with Brock Lesnar, they could have did all that without ending the streak. And I think they missed out on a lot of stuff regarding the streak. Now, Undertaker could have kept his streak intact. You could have had merchandise. You could have had a documentary about it, which would have the Undertaker either in character or out of character talking about each WrestleMania match that he had, which meant that in later years he would have, you know, he beat Bray Wyatt. Rest in peace, Bray Wyatt. He did wrestle Roman Reigns. I'm going to talk about him too. You know, he would have beat Roman Reigns, even though they were pushing him heavily at the time. But it was not a good decision to end the streak because once the streak was ended, I mean, in my opinion, that was it. You know, not saying that killed him, but they could have kept that they really could have got a few more $1 million out of the streak being intact. I mean, they really could. Like I said, two key things: merchandise with the streak, you know, the numbers and, you know, Undertaker symbol and all that stuff. And they easily could have did like a 2.5 or 3 hour documentary with Undertaker talking about all of his WrestleMania matches, his opponents, whether it's in character or out of character. You know, who cares? You know, but they missed out on that big time. I still don't think that they should have ended the streak. And again, if you were gonna push Brock Lesnar as that dominant heel, you could have done that without the streak. You didn't have to end the streak for him to be pushed like that, you know. And speaking of pushes, Daniel Bryan, bless his heart. Okay, so and I think I jumped ahead a bit, but I'll come back to it. So hold on. No, I didn't jump ahead too early. I'm right on track, so to speak. Okay, so Daniel Bryan. Now he's known as Bryan Danielson now in AEW, but man, that Yes movement, man, that was a big thing at the time. And even though I wasn't actively watching SmackDown and Raw at this point, I still knew what was going on in terms of you know, the actual product. And I think I did skip ahead just a little bit, but I'm gonna come back to some in a second. Just bear with me. So, like I said, Daniel Bryan, that Yes movement, it was a big thing, and to this day, it's still puzzling to me as to why they didn't go all the way with him. Because I mean, he could wrestle, he could talk, and he had a large wave of support. That was a big thing at the time. But you had people behind the scenes, and I think it was Vince who pretty much was trying to kill his push, almost like because he was getting over organically and it was a big movement, they did whatever they could to try to undermine it and sabotage it, which never made sense to me. Like, why punish the guy because he's getting over on his own? I mean, I would think that you would want that, but I digress. So it was a big moment when he won the title, but even then it was the momentum was gone because he got injured like a couple of months later, you know. And I think that's when he had to retire or something like that. Now he would come back later as a heel and be great, but still at that moment, they missed a huge opportunity with him, you know. I mean, really. And by the time they did it, it was too late. Now I remember hearing that year at SummerSlam, it was supposed to have been him and John Cena's spot, and Lesnar was probably going to squash him like he did John Cena at the show. I don't know how true that is, but if that would have been the way that they would have ended his title reign, it kind of would have been sad because he should have deserved, no, he deserved like a lengthy reign considering, like I said, he could talk, he could wrestle, and he had the fan support. Now, it'll be interesting to see if they would have booed him and cheered Lesnar like they did John Cena in that match. But, we'll never know. So that was WrestleMania 30. I really don't have too much to say about this era because, it was a lot of screwy stuff. You had that. Well, no, I do got something to say. I'm gonna come back to it. Let me see. Like I said, they just completely fumbled his push, and outside of that, I really don't have too much more to say about that era because it was mainly about the authority and all that nonsense, which hasn't aged well. And speaking of aging well, let me go back a little bit. Y'all remember the Summer of Punk? 2011. Remember that awesome match he had at Money in the Bank with John Cena, where I think his contract was coming up or something like that, and that match was his last match, and he won the WWE title. And again, the company dropped the ball with that. I mean, they really did. Now, I'm not going to go into further details on that. If you want to know what the Summer of Punk was about at that point in 2011, go back and do your research. And that right there, had they played it right, they could have went further with that, but they just didn't do it for whatever reason, But I remember that, and I remember the pipe bomb promo and all that stuff. I remember that. I actually saw that when it aired, interesting at the time. And speaking of interesting, that's going to take me to the next point before I get to some other stuff. So they finally brought Sting in. And I believe this was, the years escape me, y'all. I believe this was November 2015 or November 2016. Y'all let me know. But I was hyped for that. And I'm thinking, okay, man, after all this time, we finally going to get the Sting versus Undertaker match at WrestleMania. Didn't happen. Instead, what the hell we end up getting was Sting against Triple H. Why? And what made me mad about that match was not the fact that Triple H won, but this dude came out there later in the show in a damn suit and tie. Like, what? Anyway, y'all. So like I said, he did go in the Hall of Fame and stuff like that, and he had a couple of key moments, but they fumbled the ball. They dropped the ball. Next thing you know, a few years later, he go to AEW and ends his career there. It's crazy. And then again, you can blame Seth Rollins for that in a way, mainly because they did that buckle power bomb and that injured Sting's neck, and then he couldn't wrestle for a while after the fact. Like I said, totally dropped the ball. But give it to AEW, they did use Sting to their advantage, and I'm gonna get to AEW, I'm gonna get to AEW, Vince McMahon, Triple H. I'm gonna get to all that towards the end, So yeah. Also around this time or a little bit later, NXT would come into play. Now, I did watch a few of the takeover specials, specifically in 2014, going into 2015. They were pretty good. Now, I didn't watch any of the individual shows or anything, but I did catch some of those specials. They were pretty good. And at the time, this was Triple H's pet project. That's all that he could focus on and talk about at the time. NXT. Now, I will say this. The best takeover show that I've seen was, I think it was Takeover New York in 2019. Man, that was a great show. I mean, if you haven't checked that out, I recommend that you do so. That was a great show, y'all. But outside of that, I really didn't put too much stock in the NXT. I mean, it was what it was. I didn't have no thoughts about it one way or another. But what I do have thoughts about, a good segue here, and that's Roman Reigns. So let me talk about this guy. Now, I told this story before, but when he was with the Shield, I liked him. I liked him. I liked Dean Ambrose, also known as Jon Moxley, and Seth Rollins. He was great. My issue was when they broke them up and they were so hell bent on pushing him as a face and it was not working. That's, I did not like the booking at all. I mean, he was good. He got the job done, but they were pushing him too hard, too soon. It was obvious that he wasn't ready, you know. And again, they tried to do it as a baby face. And each time the fans were like booing him out of the arena and all of that stuff. And they were just stubborn as hell. They were determined to get that guy over by any means necessary. And it wasn't working, you know. But took time off because it was some dealing with his leukemia or something like that. He took some time off, and then I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, y'all. He came back, en route to the tribal chief. I think it was in either 2019 or 2020 at the end of SummerSlam. Y'all let me know. But you know, I was reading some of Scott Key's reviews talking about the shows, and more often than not, he would give his reviews on matches that had Roman Reigns in it. And he was all in on the tribal chief thing and giving his matches high ratings and stuff like that. Eventually, I had to check them out for myself, and I was like, okay, so they finally, after all this time, got him right as a heel, not just a heel, but a dominant heel champion to a point where he's like what the fifth longest reigning WWE champion of all time, you know, coming after Hulk Hogan, Bruno Sammartino, Bob Backlund, and I think Stan Hansen, if I'm not mistaken. I may have that right or wrong, but he's still number five. So man, so I was like, okay, and on top of that, the confidence, the swagger, if you will, and the theme music, that theme music is awesome, and I was like, man, had they done this, years prior, we would have been having a different conversation. But like I said, you know, he had won me over, which I thought he would never do. And he won me over to a point where I eventually got a head of the table shirt. Now, at that point, it had been a long time since I had some wrestling merchandise, much less paid money for it, but I wore that shirt proudly. I still have it too, And also, he won me over to a point where I actually had to go back and download some of them individual matches that he had, you know. And as a matter of fact, let me take a look at my collection again, just to let y'all know what matches I do have in my collection from him. Let me see. Give me 1 second while it comes up. Like I said before, I have all of my matches and pay-per-views and all that. I have the WWF/E stuff on one external hard drive, and I have the WCW and ECW and NWA stuff on another external hard drive. All right, so let me see. So here we go, y'all. Take your picks. So all of the Roman Reigns matches that I have in my collection, I have his match against Brock Lesnar at SummerSlam 2002, his match against Cesaro at WrestleMania Backlash 2021, his match against Daniel Bryan at Fastlane 2021, his match against Drew McIntyre at Clash at the Castle, his match against Drew McIntyre at Survivor Series. I think that was Survivor Series 2020. His match against Edge at Money in the Bank 2021, his match against Edge and Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania 37, the two matches he had against Jey Uso, the first one being at Clash of Champions 2020 and Hell in a Cell 2020, his match against Kevin Owens at TLC 2020, and his match against Sami Zayn at the Elimination Chamber last year. So I got some classics in my collection. Now, I'm asking myself as we speak, should I go try to seek out his match against Cody Rhodes at WrestleMania 39 and WrestleMania 40? We shall see. But other than that, y'all, like I said, he won me over big time, So, so that was that. Again, it's good that they got it right with him, not too late, but in time, Now, let's get to 2016. Now, I'm going to mention a little bit about this towards the end, but remember when I talked about at the beginning about all this stuff about a new era? Now, it was at this point in 2016 they were coming off of the WrestleMania pay-per-view. I think WrestleMania 32, if I'm not mistaken. Now, for some reason, they got in their heads that they wanted to bring the brand split back. And I remember listening to a couple of wrestling related podcasts at the time. You even had some hosts then even saying that they wanted to bring the brand split back. Why? Why? When you consider the roster that they had at that time, even now, it wasn't sustainable enough to split the rosters. Now, you can argue that in 2002, yeah, the roster was bloated, not in a bad way, but they had a lot of talent. So I get why they wanted to split it then. But in later years, no, they did not have enough talent to do a proper brand split. But then again, what defines or constitutes a proper brand split? But I digress. But it was around this time when they was doing the I think the regional manager thing again or something like that. I say regional manager, bless my heart. The general manager of Raw and SmackDown again, and they thought it was a good idea to bring Shane McMahon back and Stephanie McMahon back, and who should run Raw and who should run SmackDown, all that nonsense. I was like, man, I'm not interested, And then they was openly talking on TV about this being a new era. Okay, it is not a new era when you have to tell people that it's a new era. Things like that happen organically, spontaneous, naturally. You can't go out and proclaim it to be a new era. It takes the lust out of it, so to speak. And lust is not the right word. It takes the aura out of it. It was not a new era. And we see how long that era lasted, now didn't we? But again, I digress, So, and I'm going to come back to that new era thing in the end. So, outside that, I was continuing to watch WWE less and less. The last time I watched an episode of Raw was the night after WrestleMania 30. And even then, I didn't stay around for the whole show. And I think the last time I watched a full episode of SmackDown was probably in 2009, So, I mean, I just was not interested. I would still keep up with it here and there. I would still read the reviews and things like that. But, at this point, I would not watch a full episode of Raw again unless I'm watching some from back in the day. I would not watch a full episode of SmackDown today unless I'm watching some from back in the day. I'm just not interested. And I'm going to touch on that towards the end. So then we come to AEW. Now, initially, I was not going to watch AEW at all. The only reason that I started to check it out was when CM Punk came and returned to the company. Not returned to the company, returned to wrestling. In 7 years at that point, he returned to AEW. That's what made me start watching it. Now I only ordered 3 AEW pay-per-views to date, and that's probably not going to change. I ordered All Out 2021, which was CM Punk's first match back in 7 years. And that's when he wrestled Darby Allin. That was a good match. Now, when you watch that show, which also has some other good matches on it, as well as the debut of Adam Cole and Bryan Danielson, watching that show, you really did get the feeling that, pro wrestling was going to become cool again. I mean, that whole show gave you that vibe, and even going into Full Gear a couple months later, which I also ordered. If my memory serves me correctly, that was the show that had that awesome opening match between MJF and Darby Allin, and Hangman Adam Page beat Kenny Omega in the main event for the AEW title. I think. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's what it was. I almost got confused a minute. So I ordered that, and I also ordered, what was it? Revolution in March 2022, I think. So those were the only shows that I ordered. Now, after that, I didn't order anything else. I would watch some episodes of Dynamite online. I would also try to watch Rampage after a while. But after a while, I was like, no, I'm good. Now, I will say this. They do have a bright spot, and that's MJF. I like him. that guy grew on me to a point where he was actually my favorite performer in AEW. You know, now currently as I do this recording, he's injured. Not sure when he's supposed to come back. Then again, I wouldn't know when he's coming back because I'm not keeping up with it like I did a year ago, stuff like that. But man, that guy, great on the mic, great in the ring. I mean, he's gonna be an asset wherever he is. And he's young. He's like in his, I think he's in his late 20s. So that guy got his whole career after him, you know, ahead of him. So I'll say this too before I move on, you know, to close this. Even though I got a few more points to make. Let me tell y'all something. If that guy shows up in the WWE, especially with that same theme song, and it's a surprise or something like that, especially if he shows up on Raw, that guy is going to get the pop of a lifetime in this era. I guarantee it, man. You know, because the people know who he is. But I mean, just imagine if the lights go out and the lights come back on or something like that, and that theme song pop. I mean, that theme song hit, man, the people are going to go ape shit in that crowd. Michael Cole will lose his mind. You know, now is that going to make me start watching again? Probably not, but I would like to see what they would do with him. Now, in my opinion, he's probably not going to get into the main event picture that quickly, you know. And I often said that if he came in, his debut will probably, you know, be the talk of the wrestling world for all of 1 week, you know, kind of akin to what the talk of the wrestling world was when CM Punk came to AEW, you know. But my fear is that they would turn him into just another guy after the first week or two, you know, and he's way more talented than that, you know. But man, like I said, let that guy show up on Raw or SmackDown or at the end of a pay-per-view. That guy's gonna get a serious pop. Man, I could just imagine it right now. But we shall see. So I just want to make a couple of more points before I proceed to close this now. As most of you know, WWE became for sale, I think, within the last year or two. So TKO ended up coming in and purchasing the company, which ended an era, you know, the Titan Sports era. You know, I go way back. Vince McMahon was no longer the chairman. He was in an exec. He was in an executive vice chairman role. I think that's what it was called. So that pretty much, you know, freed him up, so to speak. He was still involved, but he was not overseeing the day-to-day operations of the company, just like he was a few short years prior to that. You know, so that's what happened with that. And also, let me say something about Vince McMahon right quick. Okay, now I'm sure most of y'all listening to this probably aware of the allegations against him. If you're not aware, look it up. I'm not going to talk about it here because that's what they are, allegations. But and I was listening to a YouTube show talking about this, but the guy talked about it briefly. Now, I know Vince McMahon has done some weird things over the years. You know, I'm not caping for the guy, you know. Now, I am going to give credit where credit is due because had it not been for him, as well as the other talented people over the years, the company wouldn't exist today, you know. So I am going to give him credit for that. However, what I don't like is it seems like, based on what I've been reading and what I've been hearing, it's almost like they're trying to, you know, they're loudly proclaiming that it's a new era. And again, it comes back to what I said when I was talking about 2016. When you're openly saying that it's a new era, it's not going to go well. And they're really trying to push this thing with Triple H too. Now, I'm going to get to that when I talk about him in a short bit. But it's almost like everything that happened prior to TKO taking over the company doesn't matter. It's almost like that history is slowly but surely becoming irrelevant. And the only thing that matters now is present day WWE, almost like nothing else took place over the last 30 to 40 years. And I don't like that. I don't like that whitewashing of history. I don't like it. And it's almost like they're like kind of, you know, like, I don't want to say throwing Vince under the bus, but they're almost like coming at it like, you know, you're no longer here, you know, and like just ultimately throwing shade like this a new era. And like I said, loudly say that it's a new era, almost like that guy meant nothing, you know. Now, if you want to distance yourselves from him because of the allegations and all that, that's one thing, you know. And nobody is saying that you got to have a portrait of him on TV. Nobody is saying that you got to mention him every show. But my God, man, don't try to treat it like this guy was never a part of it or didn't have a role in anything, unlike his accomplishments and all of the stuff prior to TKO. It doesn't matter because of the allegations, because that's all they are at this point, allegations. And like I always said, no matter who it is, if you're accused of wrongdoing and you're found guilty in the court of law, not the court of public opinion, but a court of law, you deserve to be punished. It's that simple, you know. But don't try to whitewash history like everything that took place before the TKO purchase just doesn't matter. Everything matters right here and right now. It don't work like that, you know. And like I said, just throwing shade and all this other stuff, like I don't agree with that. And I don't also like the fact that the company was so closely associated, obviously, with the McMahons for generations, and to not have Vince and Stephanie and Shane and even Linda a part of it, like removed from it totally. I don't like that for some reason. I think I know what the reason is, but it's like it's crazy to think that, you know, a company that they put their blood, sweat, and tears in for decades, they have literally no say in it. Like they just removed from the scene altogether. It's crazy. Imagine if you know, something that was in your family bloodline, no pun intended, your family, and it's been decades upon decades in the making, and there's a purchase or whatever, or a merger or a conglomerate or a takeover or whatever the case may be, and one thing leads to another, and you have no say about it, no say at all. Imagine how you would feel. I know I would be pissed, or I would definitely feel some type of way about that for obvious reasons, you know. And it's sad in a sense that I'm no longer going to be watching, and I'm going to come to that, you know, because I like Roman Reigns, I like AJ Styles, I like Randy Orton, CM Punk, Finn Balor, Rey Mysterio, Cody Rhodes, John Cena, even though John Cena is more or less inactive at this point, you know. I like Brock Lesnar, even though he's implicated in that stuff with Vince, so he's not going to be on WWE TV anytime soon. I like Drew McIntyre, Seth Rollins, you know, Sami Zayn, he okay. And on the female side, I like Bianca Belair, Becky Lynch, Charlotte, Shayna Baszler, even Jade Cargill, you know. I like them. And it's going to be sad that, outside of a recommendation or somebody telling me to check this out, I'm not going to be here to watch it, so to speak, because this era, this quote unquote new era, I'm not feeling it. It's not for me. I'm not going to force myself to like it either. And I think more so now than at any point in the past, it's really geared towards children now, more so than adults. Adults watch it, but it's really a kid product more so than any time in the past. At least I think that. But this era, I don't want no parts of it. And even the reviews that I've read, you know, when it comes to Raw and SmackDown, it seems like it's, excuse my French, y'all, it seems like it's the same shit. And it's been like that for the last few years. Like the same people doing the same stuff, you know, just rinse, repeat, or putting people in different roles. You know, I'm not feeling it. I'm not feeling the direction. I'm not feeling the storylines. I'm not feeling it overall. And like I said, I'm not going to force myself to like it at all. And speaking of not feeling this direction, that brings me to my last point, and that being Triple H. Now, I have a history with Triple H, if you will. I followed his career since late 1995 when he first came to the company. So I know what his career was, you know, going, you know, 96, 97, you know, DX, and then, you know, the game, you know, he was my favorite wrestler in 2000 going into 2001. You know, 2000 was his year, you know. Um, let me talk about it off the top of my head. The street fight against Cactus Jack at the Royal Rumble, classic. That's in my top 10. The Hell in a Cell match against Cactus Jack at No Way Out, classic. The match against The Rock at Backlash, classic. The Iron Man match against The Rock at Judgment Day, classic. The Last Man Standing match against Chris Jericho at Fully Loaded 2000, classic. You know, I mean, great stuff. He was part of some great matches, and then skipping ahead to 2001, he had a great match against Austin at No Way Out 2001. That's in my top 10, classic. The match against the Undertaker at WrestleMania 17, classic. And then him and Austin had an awesome match on the May 21st edition of Raw against Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho. Great match, you know. And on top of the matches that he would have, you know, on Raw and SmackDown, I mean, the guy was awesome. He was my favorite, even as a heel. He was my favorite, you know. And even later, like I mentioned earlier, you know, he had some great matches then, you know, but you know, he was married into the family. So it's obvious that he was going to be there for the foreseeable future, and he's there now, you know. And then going back to that TKO purchase, I think they said one of the owners, I can't think of his name right now, that owner pretty much knighted, quote unquote, knighted Triple H as the head of creative. So basically, he oversees Raw and SmackDown. So basically, what you're seeing on TV now and what you're seeing on pay-per-view, that's done at the approval, if you will, of Triple H. So he's the head of creative, you know. But it's not for me. I'm not for this era, if you will. It's not a new era. And then when I looked at a review of WrestleMania 40, yeah, I checked it out. You know, at the beginning of the show, he said this is a new era of WrestleMania. I'm like, man, please, this ain't no new era. And anytime they talk that new era shit, it's not going to go well. And I share the thing where it's going to be 6 months from now or even a year from now. You know. But I'm not a fan. You know. Now, don't get me wrong. I respect the guy. You know, one of the toughest wrestlers I ever seen. You know. Like I said, he was one of my favorites, but this era, no, not for me. Not for me at all. I want no part of this. Even with the talent that I just mentioned, I want no part of it, you know. But they're going to keep coming with this content and they're going to keep making hand over fist, you know, in terms of profits and stuff like that. And they doing more shows internationally now. So the money is going to come in. But the creative direction, I'm not a fan of it. And I'm not going to sit here and pretty much praise everything that he's doing. You know, the Paul Levesque era, the Triple H era. No, I want no parts of it, y'all. I know I done said that about 5 or 6 times already. You know, like I said, I respect him for his wrestling work. And who knows, he may be he may be effective in his role as the head of creative. I don't know. But I won't be watching. You know. So we about an hour and a half in, y'all. So where does that put me today in terms of me being a fan of wrestling, past, present, and future? Because I talked about the past, talked about the present. So what is it going to look like in the future? Now, as far as I'm concerned, I'm more than content with my classics across my hard drives. You know, especially during the era that I came up in as a kid, as a teenager, going into adulthood. You know, those memories are timeless. You know, and anytime I watch material from the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, it takes me back to those moments in time. Much like when I listen to certain hip hop albums and songs from the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, you know, so those classics, they're not going to get old to me. And as they said, you know, great stuff never gets old. It doesn't. So as far as I'm concerned, y'all can have that quote unquote new era. I'm more than content with my classics from back in the day because that's when wrestling was at its peak. It's never going to be that exciting again. It's never going to be that culturally relevant again. You know, no, it's not. You know, and all this talk about a wrestling boom, where I'm not seeing it, and others not seeing it either. You know, and like I said, I do want to see them guys perform, but I'm just not a fan of the direction, especially from a creative standpoint. I'm not. You know, and I'll say this too. You know, just imagine how big of a deal WrestleMania 40 would have been if Vince McMahon was still in charge. You know, now granted, I know there were some changes. You know, some things were a necessity, some things weren't. But you know, when TKO bought that company, that was the end of an era, and that's going to bring about changes. And like I said, again, I want no part of those changes. So I don't see myself returning to watch AEW, you know. And again, I'm not going to be in a position or situation, if you will, where I'm going to be watching Raw on a week to week basis like I used to, or watching SmackDown on a week to week basis like I used to. And with football season on the horizon, well, that's clear, you know. Who cares regarding WWE? Who cares? You know, so like I said, I'm always going to cherish my classics, always, always. And with that being said, I'm not done just yet. So, so that's my stance on my past, present, and future as a wrestling fan. I'm a wrestling fan, but not of the current product, and that's that. So two more things. I just want to let y'all know my top 10 favorite matches of all time again, as well as my top 10 favorite wrestlers of all time again. My top 10 favorite matches of all time. Now, I still have to create the order, but I know the first one, and that's Shawn Michaels versus Undertaker, Bad Blood 1997, the first ever Hell in a Cell match. Then my other favorites that rounds out my top 10 is the Shawn Michaels Undertaker match from WrestleMania 25, Bret Hart versus Steve Austin at WrestleMania 13. In fact, that's number 2. Triple H versus Cactus Jack, the street fight at the 2000 Royal Rumble. Triple H versus Steve Austin from No Way Out 2001. The 1992 Royal Rumble match. The 1990 Royal Rumble match. Randy Savage versus Ricky Steamboat from WrestleMania 3. Steve Austin versus Dude Love at Over the Edge 1998. And there's one more. Oh boy, this last one is escaping me, y'all. I'm thinking off the top of my head. Oh yeah, The Rock versus Steve Austin from WrestleMania 17. Yep, that rounds out my top 10 favorite matches of all time. And last but not least, my top 5 favorite wrestlers of all time. Number 1, Shawn Michaels. Number 2, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Number 3, Bret Hart. Number 4, Macho Man Randy Savage, rest in peace. And number 5, Ric Flair. And just for completeness sake, my favorite tag team of all time is the original Hart Foundation with Bret Hart and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. Rest in peace to him. So, with all that being said, y'all, we have finally come to the end of this video. I hope you stayed along for the ride. If you did, I appreciate it. Overall, let me know your thoughts, wrestling related. You know, let me know everything in the comment section. And with that being said, y'all, if you like what you heard and you're ready to become part of Team Discipline, go ahead and hit that like button. And last but not least, hit that subscribe button along with the bell so you're notified when I drop new videos. And until next time, my people, take care of yourselves. And remember, the power of the mind is valuable. Oh, and that's the bottom line, because Stone Cold